Hi, welcome to the recording on the lecture on the autonomic nervous system. My name is Dr. Alita Partosudarso, and I'll be walking you through the slides. So, just to give you an overview of what we're going to cover today, we're going to start with an overview of what a reflex is, focusing on the long reflex arc. We're going to talk about the neurotransmitters that are found in two divisions of the autonomic nervous system. And those two neurotransmitters are acetylcholine and norepinephrine. We're going to talk about the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. There is a third one which we'll focus on much later on. And then we're going to talk about the concept of dual innervation and finish off with a brief description of what referred pain is. So let's get started. In terms of the autonomic nervous system, the overall function of the ANS is to control cardiac, respiratory, digestive, urinary, metabolic systems without any conscious perception. So it's involuntary control, which is awesome because then our hearts still beat when we're sleeping, we're still breathing, when we're resting, when we're eating. We don't have to tell our stomach to contract and relax. We don't have to, apart from swallowing, everything else is automatic after we swallow. The process of making urine is also automatic, and metabolism is also automatic. So all these functions are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. There are three main divisions of the autonomic nervous system. The first one is the parasympathetic nervous system, or the parasympathetic division. This is sometimes called the rest and digest system. So when we're relaxed, when we're not doing anything, when we're sleeping, when we're eating, when we're resting, when we're watching TV, this is the dominant control, right? So the parasympathetic nervous system is the one that is typically in control most of the time. The second division is called the sympathetic nervous system. You may know it as the fight or flight system. Sometimes people say fight, flight, or fright, or the emergency system. So if you see a bear, if you see a lion, if you hear a loud bang, that's the system that kicks in. And what happens is it mobilizes your entire body to try to decide whether to run away, flight, or to confront whatever set it off. The third division of the ANS is called the enteric nervous system, and this is contained entirely within the walls of your digestive system. So we're not going to talk much about it in this lecture because we've got the whole section on the digestive tract much later on. The autonomic nervous system is considered a mixed bag of nerves, and mixed means that it has both sensory or afferent function as well as motor or efferent function. So basically, your ANS monitors both internal and external environments and sends that information to the central nervous system. Your central nervous system processes it and then sends information on what to do via the motor function part of the ANS. The ANS is also said to be, most organs in the body are said to have dual innervation. So dual means two. And so what happens is most organs and organ systems in the body receive both inputs from both parasympathetic and sympathetic division. And really with those two, one of this division is always stimulatory and the other one is inhibitory, right? So for example, heart rate. Heart rate at rest is controlled mainly by the parasympathetic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system slows down your heart rate. And then when there is a loud noise or whether you see something that you perceive of as being a danger, then your sympathetic nervous system kicks in and speeds up your heart rate, right? So that's what happens. When you think about digesting, what happens is your parasympathetic nervous system is the one that stimulates digestion. It's stimulated by your parasympathetic nervous system. And then what happens when you hear that loud bang or you see something that frightens you, what happens is your sympathetic nervous system says, hey, we need that blood somewhere else. We need that blood to go to the heart. We need that blood to go to the skeletal muscles so we can figure out whether or not to run away from that loud noise. And so what happens is your sympathetic nervous system sends a signal to the digestive tract to slow things down, right? So you always have this something, one of the divisions speeds it up, the other one slows it down. And the balance between the two systems is what maintains homeostasis in the body. Which brings me to this, reflexes and homeostasis. So you know homeostasis is steady state within the body. Reflex or a reflex arc is an arc which has 3 different components. And a reflex arc is an automatic response to a stimulus that bypasses conscious perception or thought. So again, the reflex arc that kicks in, there is a reflex arc that kicks in when you accidentally put your hand on a hot stove, which causes you to actually jerk your hand away before your conscious brain says, oh, that's hot, right? We've got autonomic reflexes as well. But regardless of what type of reflex, a reflex arc has 3 main components. So the first component is the sensory neuron. The sensory neuron is the part that detects the stimulus or the change in the environment, whether it be internal or external, right? And what happens is then that sends the signal to the central nervous system. In the central nervous system, you've got interneurons, right? In between neurons, and these interneurons processes information in the central nervous system from various neurons. So, for example, you might say start eating a burger. You'd have chemoreceptors in your stomach telling you what the burger is made of. You've got the sight of the burger, you've got the smell of the burger, you've got the taste of the burger. That all gets sent to the central nervous system. It gets processed there, and then a signal gets sent via the motor neuron to say, hey, give me another burger, or where are my fries, right? And reach over for your neighbor's fries or whatever. So you've got the sensory neuron, collects information from the periphery, sends it to the central nervous system, interneuron that processes the incoming signals, and then motor neuron that tells you what to do next, right? There are, as I said, reflexes that happen that involve skeletal muscles. They're called somatic reflexes. And then there are automatic or autonomic or visceral reflexes that involve smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, and glands. So these reflex arcs are all automatic, right? Again, hand on the hot stove, you're jerking your hand away before your brain says, oh, it's hot, right? When we're talking about reflexes that are found within the autonomic nervous system, we've got long reflexes and short reflexes. Long reflexes involves the central nervous system, right? Long reflexes include the reflexes that are to do with the parasympathetic nervous system, as well as those with a sympathetic division of the ANS. The long reflexes involve 2 neurons in the efferent pathway. So 2 types of motor neurons, right, from the central nervous system back to the effector cell. And the 2 neurons meet together in this ganglion. Remember what a ganglion is. A ganglion is a collection of cell bodies outside of the central nervous system. So the first neuron that comes out of the central nervous system and ends in the ganglion is called the preganglionic neuron. The second neuron, the one with the cell body in the ganglion and projects to the target effector cell, is called the postganglionic neuron. So that's a long reflex. The short reflex is one that does not involve the central nervous system. So the short reflex are the ones that are contained within the enteric nervous system that is contained entirely within the walls of the digestive system. Short reflexes include neurons that are involved in smooth muscle contraction. So they're called the myoenteric plexus. Again, myo meaning muscle, enteric referring to the digestive system, plexus is a network. So the myoenteric plexus are involved in coordinating smooth muscle contraction and relaxation in the digestive tract. And then you've got the submucosal plexus that is just below the mucosa that is involved in gland secretion. Again, this is all I'm going to talk about with regards to the short reflexes because we're going to pick it up again when we're talking about the digestive system further down the track. Rest of the lecture is on the long reflex arc of the autonomic nervous system, so we're going to focus on the parasympathetic as well as the sympathetic divisions of the ANS. So again, what you have is you have this reflex arc where you have the sensory receptor collecting information from the periphery, whether it be inside or outside the body, sends it to the central nervous system, either the brain or the spinal cord. There's processing happening in the central nervous system. And then once the central nervous system decides on an action, it sends it firstly to the preganglionic neuron, the neuron before the ganglion, which is over here, right? So that's the preganglionic neuron. That synapses in the ganglion, right? And this ganglion only contains neurons that are involved in the autonomic nervous system. And then, so you've got cell body over here, right? Projects over here to the ganglion, cell body of the postganglionic neuron, which projects to the target effector cell, right? So this is the one that makes the heart beat faster, that makes the blood vessels dilate, which makes your digestive tract relax or contract or what have you. So you've got preganglionic neuron and then postganglionic neuron, and then in the middle you've got the ganglion, which is the collection of cell bodies. In terms of the two divisions of the ANS that I'm going to talk about, you've got the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. So the sympathetic nervous division is indicated by this picture over here, the parasympathetic by this picture over here. So what you can see over here is when we look at the preganglionic neuron and the postganglionic neuron, when we look at where the cell bodies of the preganglionic neurons are, in the sympathetic nervous system, they come off the thoracic to the lumbar portion of the spinal cord. So they're coming off from the lateral horn of the thoracolumbar spinal nerves. You compare that with the location of the preganglionic cell bodies of the parasympathetic nervous system in 2 over here. So what you can see here is the parasympathetic nervous system. The cell bodies of the first neuron, the preganglionic neuron, are either located within the bottom part, at the bottom part of the spinal cord, sacral spinal nerves, or at the brainstem, right? Part. And so what happens is that, or the cranial nerves. So they would be the craniosacral part of the central nervous system. If you look at the length of the preganglionic neuron, what you can see here is that in the sympathetic nervous system, they come from the spinal cord and are very short, right? So they have short preganglionic axons, but in the parasympathetic nervous system, they start either in the cranial nerves or in the sacral nerve, and they travel quite a distance. So the length of the axon of the preganglionic neurons of the parasympathetic nervous system is long. Now, second part is the location of these cell bodies of the second postganglionic neuron. And what you can see here is in the sympathetic nervous system, they're located either in the, these are called the sympathetic chain ganglia because they form a chain over here, or they're in these collateral ganglia over here, right? And so what happens is the length of the axon of the second ganglia in the sympathetic nervous system is long. And what you can see here as well is that, and I'll talk more about it later, is that you can have one projection here that diverge, that spread out, right? So sympathetic nervous system nerves diverge and spread out to different locations, and I'll explain why in a little bit. And if you look at the parasympathetic nervous system, what happens is that the cell bodies of the postganglionic nerves are located either very close to its target effector, or they're actually located right in the walls of the target organ. And so their axons of this second postganglionic neuron in the parasympathetic nervous system is short. And what you can see here is they just end up projecting to one organ, right? So they do not diverge at all in the parasympathetic nervous system. I'll explain more as we go along. But first, what I'm going to do is speak a little bit about the receptors and neurotransmitters that are found in the two divisions of the ANS, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic divisions. And so the two neurotransmitters are acetylcholine and norepinephrine, right? So what you can see here is that acetylcholine is released by cholinergic neurons. So cholinergic neurons, the definition of cholinergic neurons are neurons that release acetylcholine. And their acetylcholine or neurotransmitters are always released by the neuron before the synapse, right? So if you look at this, this is the synapse right over here. And so the neurotransmitters are released by the presynaptic neurons. And what happens is acetylcholine then travels across the synapse and binds to a cholinergic receptor, right? So the receptor that binds specifically and only to acetylcholine are called cholinergic receptors. Cholinergic receptors comes in two different flavors or two different types. They're nicotinic cholinergic receptors, which also bind to nicotine, which is why it's called nicotinic cholinergic receptors. And they're also muscarinic cholinergic receptors. These also bind to the chemical called muscarine, right, as well as acetylcholine. And these cholinergic receptors are found in the cell after the synapse, right? So that's what happens with acetylcholine. Norepinephrine, similar thing. Neurons that release norepinephrine are called adrenergic neurons, right? Because the other name for norepinephrine is noradrenaline. Adrenergic neurons are found only in the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. Norepinephrine as well as epinephrine bind to receptors called adrenergic receptors. Two different main types, alpha adrenergic receptors and beta adrenergic receptors. And these are found on the postsynaptic cell. All right. When we look at how long and how the actions of acetylcholine and norepinephrine stop, this is how it happens. So when you have these vesicles containing ACH, Each vesicle of acetylcholine contains between 1,000 to 50,000 acetylcholine molecules. And when an action potential reaches the nerve terminal, so you have an action potential here, goes down the axon, reaches the nerve terminals. What happens is when it reaches the axon terminal, it causes exocytosis from 30 or 3 to 300 of these vesicles. So at any given time, when you've got an action potential going down a cholinergic neuron, it would release 30,000 to 3 million molecules of acetylcholine into the synaptic cleft. Sounds like a lot. The problem is that acetylcholine only lasts for 1 to 2 milliseconds. So it's over and done. The effect is over and done with within a split second, literally. So what you need is, if you want acetylcholine to have an effect, you need continuous release of acetylcholine to have a sustained effect. And the reason why acetylcholine doesn't last that long is that there's a specific enzyme called acetylcholinesterase that is found on the postsynaptic membrane of the target cell, right? So what happens is you've got this enzyme over here called acetylcholinesterase that basically breaks down acetylcholine into its component parts, and then it stops working. So that's why you need constant release of acetylcholine. The other neurotransmitter, norepinephrine, and its companion hormone, epinephrine, last longer, because what happens is epinephrine or adrenaline is a hormone that travels through the blood, whereas norepinephrine is a neurotransmitter that's released by adrenergic neurons. And the combination of epinephrine in the blood and norepinephrine in the synapse means that it lasts longer. How norepinephrine action is terminated is that it gets taken up again by the neuron that releases it. And so that's called reuptake. Needs a pump to do it. And what happens is once it gets taken back up into the neuron that releases it, it either gets repackaged into vesicles or it gets broken down by a couple of different enzymes in the presynaptic neuron, right? And you can see over here, epinephrine is broken down by one of those same enzymes in the liver. So, just a slide to emphasize the difference between norepinephrine and epinephrine. So what you can see over here is this is the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. And what you can see is when it is activated by a loud bang or a dangerous looking something that you see or hear or what have you, it stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. And the stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system then acts to release both norepinephrine into the synapse and epinephrine and norepinephrine by the adrenal medulla. And by the way, that's why epinephrine was originally called adrenaline, because it was released by the adrenal gland, right? The adrenal medulla. So what happens is the epinephrine and norepinephrine that's released by the endocrine gland, the adrenal medulla, is released into the bloodstream where it travels, right? And so if you look at the difference here, norepinephrine is released both as a neurotransmitter and a hormone. So a neurotransmitter by the axon terminal, hormone by the adrenal medulla, whereas epinephrine is only released as a hormone by the adrenal medulla, right? Neurotransmitters travel a very short distance across the synapse, have a short duration of action, and causes short-term changes. Hormones, on the other hand, travel a long way through the bloodstream have a much longer duration of action and causes longer term changes, right? So that's the difference between a neurotransmitter and a hormone. So what I'm going to do now is go through what the parasympathetic nervous division of the ANS does, and then follow on with the same thing with the sympathetic division of the ANS. So as it says over here, the parasympathetic division of the ANS is sometimes referred to as the craniosacral system because it comes off from some cranial nerves as well as the sacral portion of the spinal cord. As I said before, the neurons of the axons of the parasympathetic nervous system don't diverge. So each axon goes to a single target organ, right? Cell bodies of the parasympathetic nervous system are housed, as I said, either in the cranial section of the either in the cranial nerves or in the sacral portion of the spinal nerve. And then the cell bodies of the postganglionic neuron located in the terminal ganglia, and the axons of the preganglionic neurons are long. So you can see over here, they're long preganglionic axons, and the postganglionic axons are short because they're either a very short distance away from the target organ or they're actually found within the walls of the target organ itself. Parasympathetic nervous system. When you look at the pre and the postganglionic neuron, the preganglionic neuron is a cholinergic neuron because it releases acetylcholine as its neurotransmitter. The acetylcholine then binds to and activates nicotinic cholinergic receptors located on the dendrites of the postganglionic neurons. So this is the nicotinic cholinergic receptors. The effect of acetylcholine binding to its receptor is always stimulatory. So as soon as acetylcholine binds to this, it activates the postganglionic neuron. The postganglionic neuron is a cholinergic neuron that also releases acetylcholine, right? That's what cholinergic neurons do. And what happens is that the acetylcholine that's released by the postganglionic neuron at the axon terminal then binds to cholinergic receptors on the target effector cell, right? And the effect of acetylcholine binding to receptors on the target effector cell can be either inhibitory or stimulatory depending on the type and location of the receptor. So, for example, if acetylcholine binds to its receptor in the heart, it slows down heart rate, slows down, decreases the force of contraction of the ventricles. When it binds to muscarinic cholinergic receptors in the digestive tract, it speeds up or encourages digestion and absorption. When it binds to receptors in the respiratory system, when it binds to receptors in the smooth muscles of the bronchioles, it actually contracts the bronchioles to make it narrower, and it stimulates activity of the urinary system. So again, depending on which tissue these receptors are found, will lead to either a stimulatory effect, as is the case in digestion, or an inhibitory effect, as is the case on the heart. When we look at the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, what we can see here is that it's referred to as the thoracolumbar system because the cell bodies of the preganglionic neuron emerge from the thoracic lumbar part of the spinal cord. What happens is that these neurons diverge, so they go different places to have 10 to 20 different um, targets. And the cell bodies of the postganglionic neuron are located fairly close to the spinal cord in either the sympathetic chain ganglia over here or various paravertebral or prevertebral ganglia that are highlighted here in blue. In the sympathetic division, the axons of the postganglionic neuron are very short, and the axons of the length of the axon of the postganglionic neuron are long. In terms of the divergence of the sympathetic uh, division neurons, it's easy to understand why it diverges. Because when you actually hear a loud bang or you see something that you perceive as a threat, you want your whole system to be ready in a split second. So that's why it diverges, so that it can hit all the different organs in your body and all the different muscle groups and all the different parts of your body at the same time very, very quickly, right? So you need that coordination. You need that to be to happen quickly, and you need it to be simultaneously at the same time, right? So some examples of where it goes is that it needs to activate the respiratory system so that you can breathe faster and harder to get more oxygen in and to get rid of the buildup carbon dioxide. It needs to actually activate the cardiovascular system so that your heart pumps harder and faster so that you can have more blood flow to your skeletal muscle. It needs to activate the sweat glands so that when you become hot, you can sweat to reduce the excess heat. And it also needs to inhibit the digestive system in order to divert blood from the digestive system to the skeletal muscles so you can run away if you need to. So, in terms of divergence, what happens is that it can, you've got this sympathetic neuron over here, starting at the spinal cord. And what it can do is it can actually synapse with a postganglionic neuron at the same level. So you got one coming out at the T1 level, synapsing at the postganglionic neuron at the T1 level. Or it can actually send signals up or down that level that it comes in at. And this is, again, to activate the most number of effector cells as possible. So it can either go up or go down. Third, it can actually go through the sympathetic chain ganglion to synapse with another ganglion outside of the sympathetic ganglion. And then fourthly, it can actually just go straight to the adrenal medulla so that the adrenal medulla can release epinephrine and norepinephrine as hormones so that you can have a sustained running away from the bear or lion or what have you, so that you can escape that danger, right? So this is the reason for the divergence of the sympathetic efferent neurons. So when we look at the sympathetic nervous system, what we see is that the preganglionic neuron, because it releases acetylcholine, is called a cholinergic neuron. And the acetylcholine is released at the axon terminal of the preganglionic neuron to bind to nicotinic cholinergic receptors on the on the dendrites of the postganglionic neuron. The postganglionic neuron is activated when that occurs, right? Effect of acetylcholine binding to its receptor, it's always stimulatory, so it's activated. So that sends a signal down the postganglionic neuron, and the postganglionic neuron, because it releases norepinephrine, is an adrenergic neuron. And what happens is norepinephrine is released at the axon terminal of the postganglionic neuron to bind to the receptor on the target effector cell, and depending on where the target receptor cell is and what type of receptor, what type of adrenergic receptor it binds to, the effect can either be inhibitory or stimulatory. Right? So again, if you look at the effect of the sympathetic nervous system throughout the body, when it binds to receptors in the heart, it causes the heart to beat faster and stronger. When it binds to receptors in blood vessels, it causes the blood vessel to constrict. So vasoconstriction in order to drive up blood pressure. When it binds to receptors in the digestive tract, it is inhibitory. So it slows down digestion and absorption. It slows down secretion of saliva and other digestive secretion. So that's why sometimes when you're like in a nervous situation, you've got a dry mouth, right? So that's part of the sympathetic nervous system kicking in. It activates sweat secretion, causes breathing to be faster and deeper in order to get more oxygen in and to get rid of the CO2 that your body produces. It relaxes the smooth muscle in the bronchioles to make it open wider so that more air can go in. And so you can see here in some places it has an inhibitory effect, like the bronchioles. In other places it has a stimulatory effect, like the heart, right? So again, a note here, when a neurotransmitter binds to a receptor, it always activates the receptor, but the effect of the receptor activation can either be inhibitory or excitatory, depending on the receptor and the tissue and the neurotransmitter. Next thing I want to do is talk about the concept of dual innervation. So dual innervation is when an organ or system receives input from both the parasympathetic and the sympathetic divisions of the nervous system, of the ANS. Most systems are influenced by both divisions, where one of them acts as an accelerator and the other one acts as a brake. And this allows precise control of effector tissue. So in example 1, in terms of digestion, the parasympathetic division stimulates digestion, while the sympathetic division inhibits digestion, right? In terms of heart rate, the parasympathetic nervous system inhibits heart rate, so slows down heart rate, whereas the sympathetic division stimulates or increases heart rate, right? So you can see over here that one division speeds up, the other one inhibits, right? And depending on the tissue, the parasympathetic is either the inhibitory one or the stimulatory one, or vice versa. Right? If you look at this, which organs are innervated only by the sympathetic nervous system, what you can see here is when you look at the parasympathetic nervous system, what you can see is that the adrenal gland has got no connection with the parasympathetic nervous system. It's not shown over here, but the adrenal gland also has no the parasympathetic nervous system also has no connection to sweating, right? So that's interesting too. This is the balance in competing autonomic reflex arcs. So you've seen the two halves of this in previous slides before. So what you can see here is those things that are highlighted in yellow means that that system has either an inhibitory effect or no effect at all. And what's highlighted in like the, I don't know, orange or I don't know, slightly reddish thing is what stimulates it. So you can see here, sympathetic nervous system stimulates heart rate, stimulates blood pressure, activates sweat secretion, stimulates breathing, stimulates release of renin to increase blood pressure, stimulates release of epinephrine and norepinephrine as hormone, inhibits digestion, inhibits smooth muscle contraction, so promotes relaxation, and inhibits activity of the urinary system, right? And you can also do the same thing and read the other half of this chart. So again, there is balance in competing autonomic reflex arcs. So you've got here two other examples. So control of the size of the pupils of your eyes. So again, if in low light, the sympathetic nervous system is activated to cause pupil dilation here, whereas in bright light, it activates the parasympathetic nervous system to cause the pupils to constrict. Again, heart rate, sympathetic division increases heart rate, increases blood pressure, whereas the parasympathetic division decreases heart rate via the vagus nerve. And then lastly, the concept of referred pain. So referred pain is when when there's pain in some part of the viscera, a deep structure, that is felt as pain in the skin that lies over the affected organ or in an area of skin on the body surface far removed from the site of disease or injury. And the reason behind this referred pain is that the pain receptors, say if you take a heart attack, right? A heart attack for men is often felt as a constriction of the on the chest. So I've heard people describe it as having an elephant sit on your chest or having a boa constrictor around your chest. And some people have this huge pain running down along the left shoulder, arm, and chest. So you can see over here. And so what happens is that the pain receptors for these areas of the body, so the shoulder, chest, and left arm, run along the same tract or pathway as the pain receptors from the heart. And what happens is your brain can't actually differentiate between the two. So you're having a heart attack, but your brain perceives it as pain running down your left arm. The same with pain caused by an inflamed or ruptured appendix. That's another common one. It's often perceived as pain in the lower sort of right quadrant because, again, the pain receptors from the appendix travels in the same lane or the same tract as pain receptors on that part of your body, on your lower right hand side, right? So you've got misinterpretation in the brain regarding the true location of sensory neurons being stimulated. But again, doctors have used it as a clinical tool to actually say, okay, if you have a pain running down your left arm, chances are you might be having a heart attack, right? If you have pain in your back on the left side or in the front on sort of like your medial right side, then it might be caused by something happening with the pancreas. Well, you get the idea, right? So damage to the pain in the lung and diaphragm is perceived as pain in sort of like the upper in the neck region. And again, this is called referred pain. Thank you for that. This is the last slide. I hope you've enjoyed it. Bye.